represents the northern part of Harford County who came out here today. And thank you for taking the concerns.
Thank you, Councilman, for being with us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee. And, well, this has been nice. I'm very proud of this committee because these really weren't bill hearings. They were more like briefings on a very important issue that we've dealt with in this committee for years. You know, it's interesting, we hear about term limits all the time. But this issue, Delegate Warren Miller, our Vice Chairman Sally Jamison, and myself have sat on this committee for 16 years and listened to these energy issues, and we were as naive to them back then as you were now, but we asked the same type of questions back then to bring us up to speed to understand that. Now, the three of us were not here when deregulation happened. It happened just before we got here, and a lot of us weren't happy about it. When someone said to me, Delegate Impalario, why don't you support deregulation? I said, because it's not real. Someone has to own the lines. Someone has to own them, and they can't be shared. So here we are. So that brings us to House Bill 784, and I'm not going to go into the bill real deep because the bill covers all the same issues that were just covered in the bill that Delegate Schlega presented. The difference is this one repeals the eminent domain power granted to a private utility company for profit and puts it back to where we were. As you heard the Public Service Commission said, this project would go forward with or without that power of eminent domain. So last year, a bill came in late, it moved through quickly, and it did not get any of these questions or any of the briefings that we just got today. And we moved too quickly when given that type of authority out. You heard my statements that these for-profit power companies are not beholden to us. They're not even in the state of Maryland. The voters didn't vote for them, and they definitely didn't vote to give them the power of eminent domain. I did a survey in my district. 98% of the people are against giving the power of eminent domain to a for-profit power company. Now, are we against eminent domain? No, we aren't. But there is a better way to do this than what we see before us. And what my bill would do would set up a work group, a study, to bring all the parties together to figure out how do we move forward in this deregulated market when it comes to power lines. And you've heard power lines are like highways. They're just like I-95. They transport a product. And should the state of Maryland, who owns that I-95, be able to pick and choose who's going to get to run up and down it? And we all know the answer is no. We can't do that. There's a fee paid to run up and down it. So maybe that is how we need to move forward with easements and right-of-ways when it comes to power line. That should be a topic for discussion. You have to question why in a district like mine, where in the 7th legislative district, not the biggest district in the world, we are going to lose 1,000 acres to solar farms. 1,000 acres. 13 solar farms. We don't have 13 roads up there, yet we're going to have 13 solar farms. And because of that decision to put them up there, we don't have enough power. So now we're going to lose over 1,000 acres in Harford County to run a power line. And you saw the pictures, and you all have to wonder, why isn't this being run on the existing grid? Well, because they don't want to pay the freight. They don't want to pay the toll to whoever owns that. They don't care how much it costs to build that line. They care about how much they're going to make going down the road. And who else is going to have to pay them, because they're not the only ones using that line. They want to build their own freeway, their own highway. So what do we do next year when another company comes in and says, we can sell power cheaper than them, and we don't want to run it on that line. We want to run it right next to, we're an open market now, we're deregulated. Shouldn't everybody have a right to run their own highway? Shouldn't northern Harford County or Frederick County or southern Maryland look like clotheslines stringed across our landscape, so every one of these out-of-state companies can have a shot at making a big profit? And who cares about the people? We don't care about them. And if we did care about them, we would be using energy sources in the state of Maryland that are reliable. I mean, look, I've been here a long time. I was open to wind, I was open to solar, but I foresaw these problems coming once we got the knowledge of the truth about them. So today, we could build a brand new coal-fired plant, a brand new nuclear power plant. We wouldn't take up 300 acres, but instead, we're going to take thousands and thousands of acres in the state of Maryland and move forward. So what this bill does, it puts the protections in that Delegate Schlager asked for, maybe a little bit of difference in it, but it's saying, let's repeal this power of eminent domain that the Public Service Commission said they do not need. You heard him. He wasn't here to get one side or the other. He said that project can go forward with or without, and they're probably exempt. They'll probably have that, whether we change this or not, they will. But let's stop this before it comes to your county, or your county, or your local street. Let's stop it now. Let's bring all the stakeholders together so we can sit down and figure out how are we going to use our highways, these power lines in the state of Maryland, to service the public properly. Wouldn't it be good if there's an existing gas line that the new power line ran on top of? So we don't have to take anybody else's property. Or we could run that gas line next to the existing power line. BG&E just did a big project upgrading power lines in my district. I'm glad they did that. But I just can't sit back, idly watch us give one of the greatest powers, the power of eminent domain, which the founders of our country used to win our freedom. They used it to take ships to fight the British. They used it to build Washington, D.C., our government. They used it to build roads. It was never meant to be used to build shopping centers. It was never meant to be used to help companies that are for profit make larger profits. And if we can do this with power lines, why don't we do this with solar farms? Why don't we do this with wind farms? Why don't we do this with cell towers? They're all utilities. Why should they have to negotiate with the people? Just let them go and demand the property, and the best property is those properties that are in ag easement. You heard the testimony. Those properties in ag easement, they don't have to recognize any of the restrictions, any of the environmental concerns. They pretty much have carte blanche what they want to do on those properties. So I want to thank you for taking so much time and asking so many questions to really bring you up to speed, where the three of us and the chairman have sat for 16 years. And there's a lot of things that happen in here we let slide, but the power of eminent domain is something we should take a serious look at. And we better look at the fact of where our right-of-ways are going to go in the future, how they're going to be used, because everybody and their brother should not have the right to condemn property for profit, to run power lines, or solar farms, or wind farms, or anything else in our rural areas or our cities. We need to protect our public and be responsible. Now is the time to do something responsible. Pass House Bill 784, take a serious look with all the stakeholders and come up with a serious solution. Look, I know these guys are against it. If I had a toll road and could charge everybody and their brother and deny access to my customers, I would want to keep that program. That's what I would want. Eminent domain, used in a proper way, could take their right-of-ways away from them and make them lease the right-of-ways from the state of Maryland. Let the state of Maryland be able to lease those right-of-ways to more than one power company, just like I-95. Everybody who transports product has the right to transport on 95. They aren't closed out by the competitor. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you, and I'll turn it over to my good panel.
I too would like to thank you very much for paying such close attention today. I'd never dreamed everybody would be so engaged as this. I appreciate that because it's an important issue for my family and for many others who'd be affected by this in the future. There were a couple of questions listening today that I would like to kind of go back to, and they have very germane impact on this bill as well. Vice Chair Jameson, I believe you had asked about those lines that were, I took the pictures of. I took those pictures myself. They're 230 kilovolt lines, so they carry the same voltage as the proposed line that would be going through. I suspect Mr. Burns' response was maybe a little more nuanced when he said they couldn't carry it. The fact of the matter is, both of those lines have been replaced in Pennsylvania, and so they have the capacity. In Maryland, they run into old lattice work lines. And ironically enough, we just drove right past the west line on the way down here today, and I can tell you it's being replaced today with new, they'll look just like the rest of the pictures that you saw. So it may be true that they didn't have the capacity last year, maybe 2 years ago, but they will very soon. Delegate Lewis, or maybe it's Fisher, I'm sorry. You had asked about the electricity and where it was coming from and why it was coming out of Pennsylvania, and you started to put your finger on something that is kind of important to the state here, and it was mentioned that by one of the other fellows that the state imports a large percentage of electricity. To my knowledge, it's something like 40%. It's a very high number, and a lot of that reason for this project is for market efficiency reasons, which is shorthand for saying cheaper electricity. The reason it's cheap in Pennsylvania is because we've got a lot of natural gas. And the natural gas generation facilities are cheap and easy to put up. They've put a lot of them up there, and that's kind of what's holding the bottom of the market right now. So that's the energy they'd like to clear out of there. And so a lot of this line is built on the assumption that the people down in Northern Virginia have a right to the cheapest electricity available on the East Coast, which happens to be my backyard. So that's a point there. It's also kind of ironic that part of the reason that Maryland does import so much is because a lot of coal's been taken out, and I understand there's some very good reasons for that, but it is kind of ironic that the good environmental reasons you want to get away from coal, the carbon decreases and stuff, is on my back, because now it's having to be imported across my farm. So that's kind of ironic. Let's see. One other point, somebody had asked about laws in Pennsylvania. There are curtilage laws in Pennsylvania where Transource would not be able to build within 300 feet of a property. That's something that you all might want to consider. It's something that is important to Pennsylvania, and there's some very good reasons for that. Finally, I'd like to point out that with the fight that Transource is fighting right now, they wouldn't be doing this project unless they thought they could push it through, which is why it was so necessary for you. But I'll also point out that a lot of these costs are being covered by the cost of the project, which is paid for by PJM, or as part of the original cost of the project. If they win, they win. If they lose, they really don't lose. If I lose, I lose, and even if I win, I lose because I'm having to spend money on this. And so something about that deck is just not stacked evenly. So,
and thank you for your time and your attention to a matter which is obviously of great importance to those of us who are here this afternoon. And we do appreciate Delegate Empaleria's approach to this solution to this problem, and his perspective that he brings to you in his analogy, which is an excellent analogy. And I'm going to steal it and use it time and time again. I'd like to respond to a couple of issues that were raised. I felt like the girl in the classroom who just wanted to raise my hand and answer the questions because I knew the answer. And one of the issues that I'd like to address is what has been thrown about as the cost benefit of the IEC project. And I use this only as a piece of information because, again, the IEC project, the Transource project that's on the table, is not being addressed by your legislation. This legislation is going to address the future. It's going to prevent the Shaw families of the future from having to fight every time one of these projects comes across the state. You can stop that because you have the authority as our legislators, but the legislation is not yet in place. So that's what needs to be done. But the point is, the IEC project is touted as one that's going to have a savings to the ratepayers. And this kind of scares me because the PSC's goal, as I understand it, is to provide benefits of public service commission. This is what we understand the benefit to the ratepayers of the current Transource project is, which is $622 million savings over a 15-year period, which translates for 16 million plus ratepayers, a savings projected over a 15-year period of approximately $2.50 per year, or approximately 21 cents per month. I do not consider this to be of significant savings to the ratepayers. But if the PSC has to look at any savings to the ratepayers, guess who's going to have power lines across his property? Guess who's going to have to be subject to eminent domain? The property owners in the rural areas. So that somebody down the line gets a 21-cent reduction of their bill. And that's projected over 15 years. So we know, folks, how projections work over such a long period of time. The other thing that I'd like to mention is the statement that's been made time and again by those who oppose these bills, that power lines are compatible with agriculture. I mentioned that I sat on Harford County Ag Land Zoning Council. We looked very carefully at what are compatible uses in agriculture. Let me tell you, agriculture in the 21st century is not fields of soybeans, especially in Maryland. Agriculture in Harford County is pick your own farms. It's produce. It's agritourism. These uses are not compatible with high tower power lines. I was walking over to one of my pastures a few months ago. I had to walk across the property, a neighbor's property, under a high power tower line, and my ankles were tingling from the fall of the EFM. She can't run her tractor under the power lines on certain days when there's a lot of power going across because she gets shocked. I'm telling you, high power lines are not compatible with agriculture. So therefore, I implore you what I've said before. This is the time, this is the year. You must pass legislation that will stop another IEC project from being proposed in Maryland. Don't let us be a tangle of extension cords to bring energy across Maryland. Let's have a considered and studied approach to this new era of electricity transmission. Thank you.
Any questions? Madam Vice Chair?
Delegate, thank you for the bill.